Hi, greetings in the name of the Lord. I'm Kara Lyons-Pardue, professor of New Testament at Point Loma Nazarene University, and it was my honor and privilege to contribute an article on the fruit of the Spirit to this issue of Holiness Today. And so I've been invited to share some of the things I learned or how I approached this project. And to be honest, this was more convicting and more challenging than I expected it to be. Because you see, I went into it, I assume, the way that many of you will, thinking the fruit of the Spirit, oh yeah, I know that verse, and I might as well read it to get us started. By contrast, Paul says in Galatians 5:22, by contrast, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against such things. You see, I thought I knew what this passage was about. I'd memorized it as a kid, maybe learned a rhyme or a song about it. I have in mind a kind of vivid illustration of a fruit bowl in light of this. And what I recognized is something that should have been obvious. It's part of what Bible professors say to their students all the time, but that is that while it is good to memorize scripture in isolation, while these can become slogans and memory verses, and we can be inspired by the beauty of the language that we find in scripture, its real force to bring about change and its real ability to challenge us into lives of faithfulness comes within its context. The context of, in this instance, the letter in which Paul is using these virtues to challenge his readers. And so two parts of my task that were a challenge was, first of all, to see how is this passage functioning in its immediate context. And one thing that became clear, and let's see if I can scroll in my Bible software here. One thing that became clear that we see even in that first line of 5:22, by contrast, is that Paul is putting up the fruit of the Spirit as a set of virtues that exist in contrast to the works of the flesh. And so he enumerates the works of the flesh. And some of those are some of the big name sins that we would be sure to recognize. And others of them are a little bit more sneaky and tricky. They arise from a human way of making meaning and value in the world rather than staying in step with the Spirit. And so within the immediate context, I was truly challenged by this set of contrasts. Works of the flesh on one hand and the fruit of the Spirit on the other. Within the larger context of Galatians, some of the ways that we might characterize these virtues that we encounter here, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, gentleness, they stand in a bit of a contrast to the way that we read Paul's larger letter to the Galatians. Paul understands their very relationship with God to be at stake as they are pursuing other means of justification other than faith in Jesus Christ. And so Galatians is by far Paul's most feisty letter. He is attacking in some ways what he understands to be an abandonment of the gospel he proclaimed in their midst. And so the Galatian Christians find themselves confronted in this letter. And so if you haven't read Galatians in a while, I encourage you to go back and then to wrestle with the ways in which Paul might imagine that his clarion call back to the justification that comes from Christ alone might uphold these fruit of the Spirit. And so the ways in which we have watered down these virtues into something like niceness isn't enough to account for the ways they need to function in the community to point us toward Jesus. And the final thing that was an exciting piece of my study was to really take the metaphor of fruit seriously. How Paul uses it here, he returns to this agricultural metaphor in subsequent verses as well, talking about sowing in the Spirit and reaping in the Spirit. So this kind of planting and harvesting metaphor continues. It's not just a throwaway on this list of virtues. And so how the metaphor of fruit works in Galatians was important. And then also looking more broadly, fruit that is the visible outworking or outgrowth of an internal disposition is a way that John the Baptist talked. It's absolutely a way that Jesus talked, and we know some of his parables that deal with fruit or with harvest, words that are kind of interchangeable for this Greek term karpos in the New Testament. And so I also found that challenging because sometimes we read Galatians as really talking about faith completely apart from works, apart from any visible way of measuring or accounting for these activities. And yet the metaphor of fruit counters that. And so this was an exciting process. I was truly challenged and convicted, and I pray the same for you as you engage with this text and with the article. Thank you so much.